In the winter of 1999, Baltimore County was wrapped in the kind of cold that clings to the bones, gray, wet, and heavy. It was the kind of winter that made people impatient, anxious to get through their days and back inside warmth. For Hae Min Lee, a bright and popular 18-year-old senior at Woodlawn High School, January 13th started like any other. She moved through the hallways with her usual soft confidence, her hair pulled back neatly, her smile the kind that made friends wave across crowded corridors. She was responsible, grounded, and endlessly kind, qualities her teachers loved and her classmates admired. She dreamed of becoming an optician. She worked at a mall. She drove a gray Nissan Sentra that her friends joked she treated better than most people treat their siblings. Hae's life was predictable in the best way. Until it wasn't. That afternoon, sometime after school let out, Hae vanished. At first it didn't make sense. She wasn't the type to disappear, to skip work, to ignore her family. She had plans always, a shift at LensCrafters, a date later that week, a life meticulously arranged by a teenager who knew exactly where she was going. When she failed to pick up her little cousin as promised, alarm began to take root. Her family called friends, friends called classmates. Nobody knew anything. But by that evening, a police report was filed, and for the first time, the name Hae Min Lee was entered into a system designed to find the missing or confirm the unimaginable. The investigation started quietly, the police retracing Hae's final known movements. They spoke to teachers, friends, and most importantly, the people closest to her. Among them was her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed. Just 17 at the time, Adnan was widely liked honor roll student, athlete, volunteer EMT, and one of those faces everyone at school recognized. His breakup with Hae a few weeks earlier had been typical teenage heartbreak, emotional, messy, but not unusual. The two had dated in secret because of her family's strict expectations and had drifted apart in the way young love sometimes does. They still spoke, they still cared, but that winter they were no longer together. Adnan answered police questions willingly, calmly. He offered an alibi. He insisted he had nothing to hide. And with no immediate evidence pointing to foul play, suspicion didn't latch onto him yet. Then came February 9th. A man searching for a quiet place in Leakin Park, a forested stretch of land that Baltimore locals knew too well for its grim reputations, stumbled on something partially buried beneath the frozen earth. Police were called. Within hours, investigators uncovered the truth no one wanted to believe. The body was identified as Hae Min Lee. She had been strangled. Her death was ruled a homicide. And suddenly, everything changed. Detectives expanded their investigation, pressing harder, asking deeper questions. They reviewed cell phone records. They reconstructed timelines. They spoke again with the people in Hae's orbit, and soon one voice began to shape the direction of the entire case. Jay Wilds, an acquaintance of Adnan's, a young man whose involvement in the story would become one of the most debated elements of the case for decades. Jay gave a statement, then another, and another. His accounts shifted in details, but held firm in one central claim, that Adnan had confessed to him, and that Jay had helped bury Hae's body. It was a shocking allegation, one that instantly tilted the investigation toward a singular theory. Detectives followed it with fierce determination. They mapped Jay's timeline against Adnan's cell phone records. They compared locations, calls, and testimonies. Each piece that seemed to fit was added to a growing mosaic of guilt. Each piece that didn't fit was quietly adjusted or dismissed. When police confronted Adnan, he denied everything. "I didn't do this," he repeated, over and over. But on February 28, 1999, he was arrested and charged with Hae's murder. A community that once knew him as a promising teenager now saw his face on the evening news under a headline no one could reconcile. The courtroom would become the stage on which every detail, every message, every phone call, every inconsistency was scrutinized. Prosecutors argued that Adnan had been devastated by the breakup, that he felt humiliated, that he killed Hae in a fit of rage. They said his calm demeanor was deception. They leaned heavily on Jay's testimony, portraying him as a reluctant witness, burdened with the truth. They pointed to cell tower data that, at the time, seemed to corroborate Jay's story. Adnan's defense painted a different picture. They said he had no motive, no violent history, no reason to harm someone he had cared about so deeply. They questioned Jay's changing statements. They highlighted gaps in the timeline, unexplained inconsistencies, and the absence of physical evidence tying Adnan to the crime. They argued he was where he said he was at school, then at the library, then with friends. It was a case built not on certainty, but on interpretation, on belief. In the middle of it all was Hae's family, devastated. grieving, searching for answers in a storm of conflicting narratives. They believed justice was being sought. They believed the system would tell them the truth. The trial was intense, tense, and relentless. Jurors carried the heavy weight of deciding the future of a teenager and the meaning of a young woman's death. In February 2000, the verdict came: guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and robbery. Adnan Syed was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. The decision echoed through Baltimore, leaving behind arguments, doubts, and questions that would never fully settle. But the story didn't end there. In fact, in many ways, this was just the beginning. For years, Adnan maintained his innocence. Appeals were filed, motions denied. Time passed, yet the case refused to rest quietly. Something about it lingered, an unsettled feeling, an unanswered question, a sense that the narrative still had missing pieces. And then, in 2014, everything shifted again when Serial, a groundbreaking podcast, took up the case. Its in-depth investigation pulled millions into the labyrinth of conflicting testimonies, overlooked evidence, and problematic cell phone data. Suddenly, people around the world were re-examining the story Baltimore thought it knew. Experts questioned the reliability of Jay's testimony. Witnesses from the original timeline resurfaced. Cell tower experts challenged the prosecution's interpretation of the records. Potential alibi witness Asia McLean said she had seen Adnan at the library at the time the state argued he was committing the crime. Her account had never been presented at trial. The case's foundation trembled. Years of legal battles followed. In 2016, a judge granted Adnan a new trial, ruling that his original defense had been inadequate. In 2018, Maryland's Court of Special Appeals upheld that decision. But later, in 2019, the state's highest court reversed it, reinstating his conviction. It seemed like the door to freedom had opened only to slam shut again. Then came September 2022. After reviewing new evidence and acknowledging significant flaws in the original prosecution, alternate suspects not properly disclosed to the defense, unreliable cell tower data, and new forensic analysis, the state filed a motion to vacate Adnan Syed's conviction. The judge agreed. After 23 years behind bars, Adnan walked out of prison, his fate once again suspended between freedom and uncertainty. A year later, prosecutors dropped the charges. The case was effectively reset, with no convictions standing but no new suspect prosecuted. To this day, the question remains painfully unresolved. Who killed Hae Min Lee? Her family maintains unwavering belief in the original verdict, convinced that the system identified the right person. Adnan continues to insist he had nothing to do with Hae's death, fighting for complete exoneration. Jay lives a private life, his role in the case still debated by millions, and Hae, full of hope, laughter, and ambition, remains the center of a tragedy that refuses to fade from public memory. For every theory, there is a counter-theory. For every piece of evidence, a rebuttal. The tension between what can be proven and what can be believed forms the heart of this case, a case where truth feels just out of reach, hiding somewhere between the cold facts and the warm blur of human memory. And perhaps that is what makes this story linger, not only the crime itself, but the haunting realization that even after decades, even after trials, appeals, and investigations, the line between guilt and innocence can remain shrouded in shadow. In the end, the unanswered question whispers louder than any verdict. The truth is still out there, buried deeper than the body that first brought this mystery into the light. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.